The Deed is a new, dark murder mystery game available on Steam, where you're not actually solving the murder, you're committing it. And you actually have to pick a weapon and plant evidence to better the case against one of the family members or staff of the house, in order for them to be found guilty of the murder, and for you to actually get the inheritance of your family's fortune and the mansion that they live in. The game's only $1, and it's a pretty short and sweet experience. But is this dark and brooding tale actually worth the $1? The Deed uses the RPG Maker engine, which I know will immediately turn away some gamers, and usually even myself, I don't really bother a whole lot with RPG Maker games, except in these rare occurrences where I think something unique is being done, and that's what The Deed is. Yes, it uses the RPG Maker engine, but there's no real RPG elements here. There's no random battles or experience or leveling up. It's a basics of using the RPG engine to do a narrative. You're able to wander around the house and talk to the various family members and go through dialogue choices that actually come into play later on. And there's a lot of different dialogue choices. Every conversation that you have with one of the family members not only has branching decisions for you to end up making, but also will come into play later on in the investigation once the murder has taken place. The graphical style, well, not a typical RPG Maker. The models are pretty unique. I don't know if they were created specifically for this game, but they look rather good in the engine, and the fluid animation of watching the character move around and the environments overall bring a nice package to the table. In The Deed, you're playing as Aaron, who is on his way back to his family's mansion for the first time in a long time, and you're doing so under the guise of your father's birthday, though you haven't visited home in quite a while and you've had a falling out with your family. You have your sister, Jennifer, who is in rightful line to get the inheritance and the house, and your goal is to bump her off so that you can get the inheritance. But of course, if you end up getting caught murdering her, you're not going to be able to get that inheritance. Also living in the house is your strict disciplinary father, as well as your mother, who is kind of losing grip on reality. She loves her daughter, but unfortunately her daughter is still kind of insane, and you'll find that out quite quickly. There's also a butler who's been the old mainstay of the house, taking care of it since you were a kid, and the newly hired maid, who in some ways seems to be kind of pushing the butler to the side, but may also have her own objectives. The game is broken up into multiple segments. When you arrive at the house, you're going to be exploring it, getting familiar with your surroundings, visiting all the various rooms, talking to your family members and the staff of the house. Along the way, you're going to be picking a murder weapon, as well as a piece of evidence that you're going to be planting later on. You move on to the dinner phase, where all the family gets together to celebrate your father's birthday. Some dialogue decisions are made there that will come into play later on, and then you move on to the murder itself. And before you actually commit the murder, you're going to make sure that you end up planting the evidence that you picked up in the first part of the game in the correct room. And of course, you're going to have to decide and figure out what piece of evidence will work best in what room in order to implicate which family member or staff member that you want to try to get arrested for the murder. And then you commit the murder itself and quickly have to get away before the body is discovered. And then you move into the interrogation portion of the game, where the inspector has now come after the family is called after the murder, and you're interrogated. You go over kind of all the details of the entire game leading up to that point, and at the end you'll find out, are you guilty? Are you arrested for the murder of your sister? Or is one of your family members or staff members, or maybe something else altogether, ends up being decided as the final solution to the game? As far as a game like this goes, I was actually impressed by the amount of decisions you were able to make in all the different various dialogue sequences, and how the different dialogues that you pick at various times actually do come back to haunt you later on. You may pick something as a complete joke, and then it ends up getting thrown back in your face later on in the game. So even if you think, oh, that would be funny to pick, you may not want to pick it because you may not be able to end up getting the story to go the way you want to later on, especially during the interrogation portion of the game. There's also a variety of evidence and items to pick up as the murder weapon. Basically equates to one murder weapon and one piece of evidence per room, give or take. I do like the characters. Of course, I wish this is one of those games that could have been a lot longer and we could have gotten to know even more, though there is some flashback sequences that you can actually unlock by selecting different various items, not just the dialogue sequences with the various family members and staff members, but you also may look at a certain item and it actually brings you back to your childhood, so you get even more sense of what this character went through and why they ended up leaving their family's mansion in the first place, and maybe why they're actually going to commit the murder against their sister. It's a dark game, it's not for everyone, and even in its storytelling, it's still of course basic because of the way the game is set up and designed, but I was actually impressed with the amount of gameplay I got out of this short experience. I replayed through the game 4 times. One time I kind of failed, and the other times I was able to actually get exactly what I wanted. I decided I'm going to get this person arrested this time or this person arrested, and I was able to do so. Unfortunately, I did run into one major bug with one set of dialogue in particular that ended up freezing the game. I know the creators of the game have already been informed via the Steam forums, and unfortunately there are no Steam achievements, though apparently Steam trading cards will be coming to the game in the near future, so I will probably boot the game back up once those end up being implemented. Overall, I have to say I was actually surprised. There's a lot of $1 games available on Steam, or really cheap games, and yes, this is still an RPG Maker game, so you can't expect all that much, but for what is presented here, I actually really enjoyed it. I like kind of taking that RPG Maker engine, since I've used it way back in the past, and doing something a little bit more interesting with it, and I think the deed ends up accomplishing that goal. I like the art style, the choice of music that is used throughout the game, as well as just the graphics and aesthetics of the mansion and the characters themselves. Overall, for my experience with the D, which I spent a little over an hour playing through multiple times, though my first time through took about 25 minutes, and it all depends on how many characters you decide to talk to and how much you decide to actually explore the mansion, mainly during the first portion of the game. But in the end, I'm going to end up giving the Deed a 6 out of 10. It is well worth your dollar if you like this kind of game. There's no battling or action that really takes place. It's all through the text dialogue as you're exploring, but it's enjoyable, and I actually do recommend checking it out if you have a half hour or so to kill. No pun intended. But with that, it's going to wrap up this review of the Deed for PC Steam. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.